Part 1. The message from New Haven Colony reached Earth on a cold Tuesday morning. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the communications room at Earth Defense Command and watched the screen with growing horror. The transmission was broken and filled with static, but the screams were clear enough. 7 million people had lived on New Haven just 3 weeks ago. Now there was only silence and death. New Haven had been beautiful once. Green fields under an orange sky, cities where human children played in parks and went to school. Scientists worked in labs while farmers grew crops in the rich alien soil. It was supposed to be humanity's future among the stars, a place where people could build new lives far from Earth. Families had saved for years just to buy passage to the colony. They had dreams of a better tomorrow. The Kraith Dominion destroyed all of that in 2 days. Admiral Claire Bennett walked into the room and stood beside Morrison. Her face was hard as stone. She had seen the reports, read the casualty numbers, watched the surveillance footage that satellites had captured before they too were destroyed. The Kraith warships had come without warning. They dropped from hyperspace and immediately opened fire on the colony below. The habitation domes were hit first. Plasma weapons turned the protective shields to nothing, and then burned through the structures beneath. People died in their homes. Children died in their beds. The lucky ones were killed in the first strikes. The others ran through burning streets with nowhere to hide. The Kraith hunted them down methodically like they were clearing out pests. Lieutenant Amy Foster sat at her console and compiled the data. Every name was a real person. Every number represented someone who would never go home. She had to stop several times to wipe tears from her eyes. The list kept scrolling down her screen. Teachers and doctors, engineers and artists, babies who had barely learned to walk, all gone, all murdered. Morrison replayed the final transmission from the colony governor. The man had been crying. His voice shook as he begged Earth for help that would never arrive in time. He described the ships overhead, the fire falling from the sky, the screams of his people. Then the transmission cut to static and there was nothing more. Earth had tried to contact the Kraith through every diplomatic channel. Messages were sent asking for explanation, offering to negotiate, pleading for mercy. The Kraith response was always the same. Humans were vermin, an infestation spreading through space. They did not deserve to exist. They would all be exterminated. Captain Derek Hayes commanded the destroyer EDS Vengeance. He was in the ready room with his senior officers when the news broke. Several of his crew had family on New Haven. One young ensign collapsed when she heard the casualty report. Her parents and 2 brothers had moved to the colony last year. Now they were ash and dust on a dead world. The Kraith had made a calculated decision. They believed one massive atrocity would break human will, that Earth would retreat back to its home system and never venture out again. They thought humans were weak, soft, that they would surrender rather than fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Bennett stood before the command staff in the main briefing room. On the screens behind her were pictures of New Haven before the attack. Happy people going about their lives. Then she switched to the after images. Ruined cities. Scorched earth. Craters where neighborhoods had stood. Bodies in the streets. The Kraith think we will accept this, Bennett said quietly. Her voice was cold and sharp. They think we will mourn our dead and do nothing. They believe 7 million human lives are meaningless. She pulled up a tactical display. It showed Earth's war fleet. 342 ships of various classes. Destroyers and cruisers. Carriers and battleships. Dreadnoughts that could crack planets. Humanity had been building this fleet for decades, hoping they would never need to use it, praying that peace would last. Those prayers were done now. We are going to show the Kraith what happens when you murder human beings, Bennett continued. We are going to show them what Earth does to genocidal monsters. We are going to make them regret the day they ever heard the word human. The room was silent. Every officer present understood what this meant. This was war. Not a border skirmish or a police action. This was total war against an enemy that wanted humanity extinct. Some of them would not come home. Some of their ships would burn in the void. But they would make the Kraith pay for every single life taken on New Haven. Morrison brought up the intelligence reports. The Kraith held 12 star systems in their territory. Their military was strong. They had been conquering and enslaving other species for centuries. Their main battle fleet was stationed at Xerxes Prime, a fortress world deep in their space, protected by orbital platforms and minefields. Bennett made her decision. We go straight for their throat. No raids, no reconnaissance missions. We jump the entire fleet directly into Xerxes Prime and we hit them with everything we have. Some of the younger officers looked nervous. That kind of assault was incredibly risky. They would be jumping blind into the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by hostile forces. One mistake and the entire fleet could be destroyed. But Bennett was counting on surprise. The Kraith would never expect humans to be that aggressive, that bold. They thought Earth would need months to mobilize, that humans would be cautious and afraid. Instead, the fleet would bring the war to them immediately. Give them no time to prepare. No chance to reinforce their defenses. Begin immediate preparations, Bennett ordered. I want every ship ready to sail within 48 hours. Load every missile. Charge every capacitor. We are going to war and we are going to win. The orders went out across every channel, to every ship, to every station. Earth was mobilizing for war. The orbital shipyards burned with activity as crews worked around the clock. Weapons were loaded. Engines were tested. Pilots trained in simulators. Marines checked their gear. On Earth below, people watched the news in stunned silence. Everyone knew someone who had died on New Haven. The grief was universal. But so was the anger. Humanity had tried peace. They had extended hands in friendship to the stars, and the stars had answered with murder. Now Earth would answer with fire. Admiral Bennett stood alone in her office that night. She looked at the pictures of New Haven one more time. The faces of the dead, the children who would never grow up, the dreams that would never be fulfilled. She memorized those faces. Let the weight of 7 million lives settle on her shoulders. Tomorrow the fleet would sail. Tomorrow humanity would show the galaxy what they were truly made of. The Kraith wanted war. They would get more war than they could possibly handle. The message was already being prepared. It would be broadcast to every species in the galaxy, every civilization that watched from the sidelines. Earth was going to make an example of the Kraith dominion, a lesson that would echo through the stars for generations. Touch humanity and humanity touches back. Part 2, the orbital shipyards around Earth blazed with light and activity. Welding sparks flew in the vacuum as crews worked triple shifts. Every dock was busy. Every repair bay was full. The war fleet was preparing to sail and there was no time to waste. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant stood on the cargo deck of the EDS Retribution and watched the weapons being loaded. Missiles by the hundreds, torpedo tubes being checked and rechecked, railgun ammunition in massive containers that took 4 men to move. The dock workers had written messages on the missiles in chalk. Simple words that meant everything. For New Haven was written on dozens of warheads. Remember the 7 million appeared again and again. Some had names written on them. The names of people who had died in the massacre. Children and parents, friends and lovers. Each missile carried more than just explosives. It carried rage and grief and the promise of justice. Grant supervised her team as they verified every weapon system. The Retribution was a heavy cruiser, one of the biggest ships in the fleet. Its main guns could punch holes through capital ships. Its missile batteries could saturate an entire sector of space with fire. But only if everything worked perfectly. One malfunction could mean the difference between victory and death. Aboard the flagship EDS Warhammer, Admiral Bennett met with her senior commanders. The holographic display showed the route to Xerxes Prime. It was deep in Kraith space. Normally it would take weeks of careful navigation to reach. Jump drives let them cover the distance in hours, but the risk was enormous. They would be arriving in the heart of enemy territory with no support and no fallback position. Commander Paul Dixon ran the tactical simulations. The Kraith home defense fleet was strong. At least 200 capital ships, orbital fortresses bristling with weapons, minefields and defense platforms. The humans would be outnumbered and surrounded the moment they arrived. The computer gave them a 30% chance of survival. Bennett studied the numbers with a grim expression. 30% was not good odds, but this was not about playing it safe. This was about sending a message, about showing the galaxy that humanity would not accept genocide, that Earth protected its own no matter the cost. We go anyway, she said simply. The Kraith need to understand what they have unleashed. Captain Jenny Brooks walked through the hangar deck of the EDS Defiant. The carrier housed 200 strike fighters and their pilots, young men and women who would fly into hell itself when the orders came. Brooks stopped to talk with each squadron. She looked them in the eyes, shook their hands. wanted them to know she saw them as people, and not just numbers on a roster. Lieutenant Sam Peters sat in his fighter and ran system checks. His hands moved automatically across the controls. He had flown this bird 1,000 times, knew every quirk and response, but his mind was elsewhere. His daughter had died on New Haven, sweet little girl who loved to draw pictures of spaceships. She would never draw again, never laugh again, never grow up and have dreams of her own. Peters had volunteered for the most dangerous missions, the ones where pilots flew directly into enemy fire to deliver their payloads, the ones with the lowest survival rates. He did not care if he came back. He only cared that the Kraith paid for what they had done. Brooks found him there and sat down beside the fighter. She did not say anything at first, just sat with him in the quiet. Finally she spoke. "Your daughter would want you to come home." Peters shook his head. "My daughter wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to help other kids learn. The Kraith took that from her, took everything from her. I am going to make them understand what that means." The captain did not argue. She understood. Every person in the fleet understood. They had all lost someone. Even those without direct connections to New Haven felt the weight of 7 million dead. It was not just about revenge. It was about making sure this never happened again. About showing the galaxy that humanity would not be pushed around. The ships assembled in formation beyond the moon. 342 vessels arranged in perfect order. Destroyers formed the outer screen. Cruisers in the middle ranks. Battleships and carriers at the core. The dreadnoughts brought up the rear with their massive engines and overwhelming firepower. It was the largest military formation humanity had ever assembled. On Earth below, billions of people watched the broadcast. Every screen showed the fleet. Every news channel covered the departure. Cities fell silent. Work stopped. Everyone wanted to witness this moment. The moment Earth went to war among the stars. Admiral Bennett stood on the bridge of the Warhammer and looked at the tactical display. Every ship reported ready. Every crew was at battle stations. The jump coordinates were locked in. They would emerge in Xerxes Prime in perfect attack formation, hit the Kraith before they knew what was happening. "This is Admiral Bennett to all ships," she said over the fleet-wide channel. Her voice was calm and steady. "Our enemy believes we are weak. They believe one atrocity will break our spirit. They murdered 7 million human beings and expected us to do nothing. Today we show them the truth. Today we show them what Earth does to monsters. Today we make them pay for every single life they took." The bridge crew listened in silence. Every word was true. Every word was felt. "The Kraith think they are apex predators," Bennett continued. "They have conquered dozens of species, enslaved entire worlds. They believe they are unstoppable. But they have never faced humanity at war. They have never felt Earth's fury. That changes today." She paused and looked at her command staff. Morrison at tactical, Foster at communications, Dixon at navigation. Good people who would follow her into the mouth of death itself. "We will lose ships today," Bennett said quietly. "We will lose people we care about. But we will win, because we fight for something greater than ourselves. We fight for those who can no longer fight. We fight so that no other colony suffers what New Haven suffered. We fight so the galaxy knows humanity will not be victims." The countdown began. Across the fleet, thousands of crew members strapped into their stations. Some prayed. Some checked their weapons one more time. Some just sat in silence and thought about the people they had lost. "All ships report jump drives ready," Morrison announced. Bennett took a deep breath. This was it. The moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. They would either emerge victorious or die trying. But they would not back down, would not surrender, would not accept what had been done to New Haven. "Execute jump," she ordered. The drives engaged with a sound like reality tearing. Space folded in on itself. The massive fleet vanished from Earth orbit in a flash of light. They were gone, hurtling through hyperspace toward Xerxes Prime, toward war. The journey took 3 hours subjective time. 3 hours where the crew could do nothing but wait. Check their gear, review their orders. Think about what was coming. The Kraith would not be expecting them. Would not believe humans could mobilize this fast. That element of surprise was their greatest weapon. Grant walked through the retribution and spoke with her gunners. Made sure everyone knew their jobs. The cruiser would be in the thick of the fighting, taking fire from multiple directions. They had to be perfect or they would die. Hayes gathered his officers aboard the Vengeance. The destroyer was small and fast. They would be running knife fight missions through the enemy formation. Close-range engagements where one mistake meant death. But destroyers were built for this, built to get in close and hurt ships much larger than themselves. Peters sat in his fighter in the Defiance launch bay. The canopy was open. He looked at the picture of his daughter taped to his instrument panel. Her smiling face, her bright eyes. He touched the picture gently. "This is for you, baby. For you and all the others." The fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly on target. 342 ships appeared in the heart of the Kraith home system, in perfect attack formation. Alarms screamed across every Kraith vessel. Their sensors went crazy trying to process what they were seeing. "All ships," Bennett's voice rang out. "Weapons free. Show them Earth's fury." Part 3, the EDS Warhammer opened fire first. Its main railguns hurled tungsten projectiles at a speed that bent physics. The rounds crossed the distance in seconds and punched through a Kraith battlecruiser like it was made of paper. The enemy ship's shields flared and died. Then its hull split open from bow to stern. Atmosphere vented into space in frozen clouds. Secondary explosions rippled along its length as power systems overloaded. The battlecruiser broke in half and began tumbling toward the planet below. The rest of the fleet followed immediately. 342 ships unleashed hell. Missiles streaked through space by the thousands. Railgun fire lit up the darkness. Energy beams cut through enemy vessels. The Kraith defense fleet scrambled to respond, but they were caught completely off guard. They had expected weeks of warning. Time to prepare and mobilize. Instead, the humans had jumped right into their home system and started killing them. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and watched his tactical display. The destroyer was racing toward the Kraith formation at maximum speed. 5 other destroyers followed in tight formation. Their mission was simple: get in close and cause chaos, break up the enemy lines, create openings for the heavier ships. "Incoming fire," his tactical officer called out. The Kraith had recovered from their surprise and were shooting back. Energy beams lanced through space. Point defense systems tried to track the fast-moving destroyers, but Hayes was already jinxing his ship, rolling and diving. Using the debris from destroyed vessels as cover, a Kraith frigate crossed their path. Big mistake. The Vengeance's main guns spoke in quick succession. Depleted uranium rounds tore into the frigate's engines. The enemy ship lost power and began to drift. Hayes did not wait to watch it die. He was already locking onto the next target. "Target that cruiser," he ordered. Full missile spread. 20 missiles launched from the Vengeance's tubes. They spread out and came at the Kraith cruiser from multiple angles. The enemy's point defense got half of them. The other half slammed home. Explosions bloomed across the cruiser's hull. It tried to turn and bring more guns to bear, but 2 other human destroyers hit it from different directions. The cruiser shuddered under the combined assault, and then its reactor went critical. The explosion was bright enough to light up half the battlefield. Lieutenant Commander Grant directed the Retribution's weapons from the combat center. The heavy cruiser was exchanging fire with 2 Kraith battleships. Enemy fire hammered their shields. The air in the combat center got hot and smelled like ozone. Damage reports scrolled across Grant's screen, but she ignored them. Just kept calling targets, main guns on the lead battleship. Fire for effect. The Retribution's spinal-mounted railguns fired in sequence. The recoil shook the entire ship. The rounds covered the distance in heartbeats and struck the battleship's forward shields. The first shot weakened them. The second punched through. The third hit the battleship's armored hull and gouged a massive wound along its side. Missile batteries target the wound. Put everything we have into that opening. 100 missiles launched. They converged on the damaged section of the battleship's hull. The Kraith tried to rotate and protect the vulnerable area, but they were too slow. The missiles hit and detonated deep inside the ship. Internal explosions tore through compartments. The battleship's weapons went offline. Then its engines died. It was still there, but it was no longer a threat. "Next target," Grant called out. There was no time to celebrate. The battle was still raging. Captain Brooks stood in the flight control center of the Defiant and watched the tactical plot. Her strike fighters were launching in waves, squadrons of 6, each one racing toward assigned targets. The carriers were the key. The Kraith had their own fighters, and if those launched in mass, they could overwhelm the human fleet. Lieutenant Peters led his squadron straight into the teeth of the Kraith defense grid. Energy weapons crisscrossed space around them. One of his wingmen took a hit and vanished in a ball of fire. Peters did not slow down. He locked onto the nearest Kraith carrier and armed his missiles. Fox 3, he called out, military speak for missile away. His weapons leaped from the rails and accelerated toward the carrier. The Kraith point defense tried to stop them, but Peters had timed it perfectly. His missiles hit the carrier's launch bay just as it was deploying fighters. The explosion was catastrophic. It triggered a chain reaction that ripped through the carrier's entire port side. Kraith fighters that were still in the bay were incinerated. The carrier listed hard to starboard and began to fall out of formation. Good kill, his squadron mate called out, moving to next target. They had 4 more carriers to destroy. Commander Morrison coordinated the fleet's movements from the Warhammer's combat center. The humans were winning, but the cost was high. 2 destroyers had been destroyed. A cruiser was badly damaged and limping out of the fight. Casualties were mounting. But the Kraith were suffering far worse. Second wave, concentrate on those dreadnoughts, Morrison ordered. Third wing, protect our flanks. They are trying to surround us. Admiral Bennett watched from her command chair. The battle was unfolding exactly as she had hoped. The Kraith were strong, but they had grown complacent. Centuries of easy victories against weaker species had made them sloppy. They fought like bullies who had never been challenged. The humans fought like people who had something to prove. A Kraith admiral opened a communications channel. His face appeared on the main screen. He was trying to negotiate, trying to buy time. Bennett cut him off before he could speak. You had your chance for diplomacy. You chose murder. Now you get justice. She closed the channel. There would be no negotiations, no mercy. Not today. The space around Xerxes Prime became a graveyard of ships. Burning hulks drifted through the void. Bodies floated among the debris, both human and Kraith. The living fought on over the corpses of the fallen. Hayes took the vengeance through a cloud of frozen atmosphere from a destroyed Kraith vessel. His sensors were momentarily blinded. When they cleared, he found himself facing a Kraith destroyer at point-blank range. Both ships opened fire simultaneously. The Vengeance's shields flared and buckled. Alarms blared. But the Kraith destroyer got the worst of it. The Vengeance's guns tore it apart at close range. Damage report, Hayes called out. Shields at 20%. Hull breach on deck 3. Casualties in engineering. Hayes gritted his teeth. They were still in the fight. That was what mattered. Grant watched another battleship die on her screens. The Retribution had shifted fire to the orbital platforms now. The massive defensive structures that protected Xerxes Prime. They were tough, heavily armored and shielded, but they could not move. Could not dodge. That made them vulnerable. Concentrate fire on Platform Delta, she ordered. All weapons. The Retribution was not alone. 15 other cruisers joined the bombardment. Their combined firepower was staggering. The platform's shields held for almost a minute. Then they flickered. Then they failed. Once the shields were down, the platform died quickly. Armor meant nothing against weapons designed to crack planets. Peters dove through the atmosphere of Xerxes Prime. His mission had changed. Now he was going after ground targets, the command centers where the order to destroy New Haven had been given. He thought about his daughter as his fighters screamed through the sky. Thought about justice and revenge and all the things that kept him flying. His targeting system locked onto a massive complex. Government buildings and military headquarters all clustered together. Peters armed his biggest bombs, the kind designed to take out bunkers and fortified positions. This is for every child who died on New Haven, he whispered. He pickled his weapons and pulled up hard. The bombs fell away and struck their target with devastating precision. The complex vanished in a mushroom cloud. The shockwave rattled Peters's fighter even at altitude. 8 hours into the battle, the Kraith home fleet was broken. Less than a quarter of their ships were still fighting. The rest were destroyed or drifting. The orbital platforms were rubble. The planetary shields had failed. The Kraith ground forces were calling for terms. Admiral Bennett stood and looked at the tactical display. They had done it. Humanity had struck into the heart of the Kraith Dominion and won. The cost had been high. 11 ships destroyed, 38,000 personnel lost. But they had accomplished their mission. Open a channel to the Kraith leadership, she ordered. The Kraith planetary governor appeared on screen. He was scared. His species had never lost like this before. We request terms, he said in broken English. Bennett's expression did not change. Humanity requests the same terms you gave New Haven. 7 million people who will never speak again. You taught us that mercy is weakness. We learned the lesson well. The bombardment began, not on civilian targets. The humans were better than that. But every military installation on Xerxes Prime felt Earth's wrath. Every government building, every weapons factory, every naval yard. The Kraith war machine was being systematically destroyed. Part 4. The Kraith orbital fortresses had stood for 300 years. Massive structures that had defended Xerxes Prime through a dozen wars. Their shields could absorb the firepower of entire fleets. Their weapons platforms could destroy capital ships with single shots. They were considered the ultimate defensive system, impregnable, unbreakable. The humans broke them in 6 hours. Lieutenant Commander Grant watched the tactical display as another fortress died. The Retribution had been pounding it for the last 30 minutes. Railgun fire, missiles, energy weapons, everything they had. The fortress shields had held at first, absorbing punishment that would have destroyed a dozen lesser structures. But the humans did not let up, did not give the fortress time to recover or repair. The shields flickered orange, then red, then they collapsed entirely. Once that happened, the fortress was doomed. Without shields, its armor was just metal. Strong metal, but metal nonetheless. The human warships tore into it like wolves on a wounded animal. Compartments vented atmosphere. Power systems exploded. The massive structure broke apart and fell toward the planet below in pieces. Fortress 7 is down, Grant reported. Moving to Fortress 8. Her crew was exhausted. They had been at battle stations for 9 hours, breathing recycled air that tasted like copper and fear. The combat center was hot. Some of the cooling systems had been damaged in the fighting. Sweat ran down faces. Uniforms were soaked. But no one complained. No one asked for a break. They all knew what they were fighting for. Captain Hayes brought the Vengeance alongside a crippled Kraith cruiser. The enemy ship was drifting. Its engines were dead, its weapons offline. Escape pods were launching from its sides. The crew was abandoning ship. Hayes watched them go without firing. There was no honor in shooting lifeboats, but he also did not let the cruiser survive. A single torpedo finished it. The cruiser broke apart in silence. Just another piece of debris in the growing field around Xerxes Prime. "Sir, we have a problem," his tactical officer said. "We are down to 20% ammunition. Missiles are almost gone. Railgun rounds are low." Hayes nodded. They had been fighting hard and fast, burning through their magazines. Other ships would be in the same situation. But the job was not done yet. The Kraith still had defenses, still had ships that could fight. "Conserve what we have," he ordered. "Make every shot count. Use energy weapons when possible." The destroyer turned toward another target, a Kraith battleship that was trying to rally surviving vessels. Hayes' crew was running on adrenaline and rage now. They had lost friends in this battle, shipmates who would never see Earth again. That debt would be paid in Kraith blood. Captain Brooks stood in the Defiant's flight control and monitored her squadrons. They had lost 41 fighters so far, 41 pilots who had flown into fire and never come back. Each loss hurt. Each one was a person she had known, had trained, had sent into battle knowing some would not return. But the survivors were still fighting, still flying their missions. Lieutenant Peters pulled his fighter up from another bombing run. His weapons were empty. His fuel was low, but his blood was up. He had hit every target assigned to him, destroyed command centers and military bases, made the Kraith leadership understand what it meant to be hunted. "Blue Leader, this is Control." Brooks's voice came through his headset. "Return to ship. You are Winchester." Military speak for out of ammunition, Peters wanted to argue, wanted to keep fighting. But discipline held. "Roger, Control. Blue Leader returning to ship." He turned his fighter toward the Defiant and began the flight back. Below him, Xerxes Prime burned. Cities were intact, but everything military was in flames. The Kraith would rebuild eventually, but it would take years, maybe decades, and they would never forget who did this to them. Commander Morrison worked his console on the Warhammer and tracked the battle status. The numbers were brutal. 11 ships destroyed outright. The destroyer EDS Lightning had taken a direct hit to its reactor and vanished in a flash of light. The cruiser EDS Thunder was breaking apart. Its crew was evacuating, but Morrison knew many would not make it. 38,000 human beings had died in this battle. 38,000 more names to add to the memorial walls back home. Sons and daughters, husbands and wives, people with families who loved them, but they had accomplished the mission. The Kraith fleet was destroyed. Their defenses were rubble. Their military infrastructure was burning. The message had been sent. Admiral Bennett received reports from across the fleet, ship captains calling in status, damage assessments, casualty figures. She listened to each one, committed the numbers to memory. These people had followed her into hell, and some had not come back. She owed them the respect of remembering. Admiral, the Kraith are broadcasting surrender, Morrison reported. All remaining military forces are standing down. Bennett looked at the planet below. Somewhere down there was the leadership that had ordered the attack on New Haven. The people who had decided 7 million humans should die. Part of her wanted to glass the planet, turn it into a radioactive wasteland, make them feel what New Haven had felt. But that would make humanity no better than the Kraith. Accept their surrender, she said quietly. But the bombardment continues on military targets only. I want every weapons factory destroyed. Every shipyard. Every military academy. When we leave here, the Kraith will not have the ability to threaten anyone for a generation. The fleet's heavy weapons continued their work. Precision strikes guided by satellite imagery and intelligence data. The humans were careful.
Civilian areas were avoided.
Hospitals and schools were off limits. But anything connected to the Kraith military was fair game. Grant walked through the retribution and checked on her crew. They were holding together, but barely. Everyone was running on fumes. The ship itself was battered. Hull breaches had been sealed with emergency patches. 3 of their main guns were offline. They had taken hits that would require weeks in a shipyard to properly repair, but they were alive. That was more than some ships could say. Hayes gathered his surviving officers in the Vengeance's wardroom. They looked like ghosts, pale and hollow-eyed. Combat did that. Took something from you that could never be replaced. But they had won. That had to count for something. We lost 18 crew, Hayes said softly. Engineering took the worst of it. Chief Martinez died sealing a breach, saved 30 people by sacrificing himself. The room was silent. Everyone had known Martinez, good man, family back on Earth, a wife and 2 kids. Now they would grow up without a father. When we get home, we make sure his family knows what he did, Hayes continued. We make sure they understand he died a hero. They all did. Brooks walked among the pilots in the Defiance ready room, the ones who had made it back. Peters sat in the corner with his helmet beside him. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. His hands shook slightly from adrenaline crash. You did good up there, Brooks told him. Peters looked up at her with red eyes. I killed a lot of them. Destroyed their command centers. Their bases, everything. And it does not bring her back. Does not bring any of them back. Brooks sat down beside him. No, it does not. But it makes sure the Kraith never do this again. Makes sure no other father has to lose his daughter to these monsters. That has to mean something. Peters nodded slowly. Maybe it did. Maybe that was enough. The battle wound down as the last Kraith forces surrendered. The human fleet took up positions around the planet. Damaged ships began repair work. The dead were recovered where possible. Bodies were brought back to be returned to Earth, to be buried with honor. Admiral Bennett stood on the bridge and looked at the planet below. The Kraith leadership had been brought to the surface under guard. They would witness the destruction of their military, would see their empire's power broken, would understand the price of genocide. Send a message to Earth, Bennett ordered. Tell them the mission is complete. Tell them New Haven has been avenged. Morrison sent the transmission. It would take hours to reach home. But when it did, there would be celebrations, relief, grief for those lost, but pride in what had been accomplished. The Kraith dominion was finished. Not destroyed, but broken, reduced to a shadow of its former self. Other species in the galaxy would see what happened here, would understand that humanity was not to be trifled with. Bennett thought about the 7 million dead on New Haven, wondered if they could see this somehow. If they knew that Earth had not forgotten them, that their deaths had been answered with fire and steel. She hoped they could rest now. Hoped they understood that humanity had shown the galaxy exactly what happened when you murdered human beings. The fleet would remain at Xerxes Prime for 3 more days, making sure the Kraith understood the terms, making sure every military target was destroyed. Then they would go home, back to Earth, back to the families waiting for them. But the galaxy would never forget what happened here, never forget the day humanity went to war. Part 5 news of the battle reached every corner of known space within 3 days. The Kraith Dominion had been one of the most feared powers in the galaxy. They had conquered 18 species over 3 centuries, built an empire on blood and slavery. No one had ever stood up to them successfully. No one had ever made them pay for their cruelty, until humanity did. The galactic news networks could not stop talking about it. The Valar Federation condemned Earth's actions, called it excessive force, barbaric. The Thrain Collective issued statements about proportional response and the rules of civilized warfare. The Arxian Assembly suggested that humanity should be sanctioned. Admiral Bennett read the reports and felt nothing but contempt. These were the same species that had stood by while the Kraith murdered 7 million humans. They had done nothing, said nothing, offered no help. But now that Earth had defended itself, they wanted to pass judgment. Let them talk, Bennett said to Commander Morrison. They are not the ones who lost New Haven. They do not get to tell us how to respond. The fleet remained at Xerxes Prime for 3 more days. Human Marines went down to the surface and secured key locations. The Kraith leadership was assembled under guard. They were forced to watch as the human warships systematically destroyed every military installation on their planet. Weapons factories were reduced to rubble. Shipyards were turned to scrap. Military academies were leveled. The Kraith watched their power being dismantled piece by piece. Some of them wept. Others raged. But there was nothing they could do. Captain Hayes stood on the surface with a Marine company and watched a Kraith general being led away in restraints. The general had commanded the fleet that attacked New Haven. He was responsible for those 7 million deaths. Now he would stand trial for war crimes. You cannot do this, the general said in broken English. We are a sovereign species. You have no authority. Hayes looked at him with cold eyes. You murdered 7 million of our people. That gives us all the authority we need. The general was loaded onto a transport and taken to the Warhammer. He would be tried by an Earth court. If found guilty, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. It was more mercy than he had shown New Haven. Lieutenant Commander Grant supervised repair work on the Retribution. The cruiser had taken serious damage. 3 of its main guns were offline. Hull plating was breached in a dozen places. The engineering section looked like a war zone. But the ship was still spaceworthy, still able to fly home. Her crew worked around the clock making temporary repairs, welding plates over holes, rerouting power systems, patching what could be patched. The permanent repairs would have to wait until they reached Earth's shipyards. But for now, they just needed to be able to make the jump home. Grant found time to write letters to the families of her dead crew. It was the hardest part of command. Telling parents that their son was not coming home. Telling wives that their husband had died in the line of duty. The words never felt adequate. How do you comfort someone who has lost everything? She did her best. Told them their loved ones had died heroes, had died defending humanity. It was true, but it probably did not help much. Death was death, no matter how noble the cause. Captain Brooks held a memorial service on the Defiant for the 41 pilots who had not returned. Their names were read aloud. Their accomplishments remembered. Fellow pilots spoke about friends they had lost. Some cried. Others stared into space with hollow eyes. Lieutenant Peters stood and spoke about his daughter. Told the assembled pilots why he had fought so hard, why he had volunteered for the most dangerous missions. His voice broke several times, but he got through it. When he finished, other pilots came up and embraced him. They all understood loss now. They were all bonded by it. The memorial ended with a traditional missing man formation. 4 fighters launched and flew over the carrier. Then one peeled away and climbed toward the stars. Flying off alone, it was symbolic. A way to honor those who would never fly again. Admiral Bennett stood on the bridge of the Warhammer and prepared to address the Kraith leadership. They had been brought aboard under heavy guard. 7 of them. The planetary governor, the military high command, the intelligence director, all the people who had made the decision to attack New Haven. They stood before her in restraints. Some looked defiant, others scared. All of them had just watched their civilization get dismantled. You are probably wondering why I brought you here, Bennett said calmly. You are wondering what happens next, the Kraith governor spoke. You have already won. You have destroyed our fleet, ruined our planet. What more do you want? Bennett walked closer to them. I want you to understand something. 7 million humans died because of your decision. 7 million people who had done nothing to your species. They were not soldiers. They were civilians, families, children. They were in our territory, the governor said stubbornly. They were on a colony world that had been uninhabited. They were not threatening you. They were just trying to live their lives. Bennett pulled up images on a display. Pictures of New Haven before the attack. People going about their daily lives. Children playing. Scientists working. Normal life. Then she showed the after images. The burning cities. The bodies in the streets. The devastation. This is what you did, Bennett said quietly. This is what you are responsible for. And now you are going to stand trial for it. The Kraith leadership would be taken back to Earth. They would face an international tribunal. If found guilty, they would be imprisoned for life. Their empire would be dismantled. Their military would be restricted. They would be placed under galactic supervision for at least a generation. It was justice, not revenge. There was a difference. Commander Morrison compiled the final casualty reports. 11 ships destroyed, 38,214 personnel killed in action, another 12,000 wounded. Those were the numbers, the cold statistics that would be reported to Earth. But behind every number was a person, someone who had left home expecting to return, someone who had family waiting. The loss would be felt across the entire planet. Morrison thought about the crew of the destroyer Lightning. It had taken a direct hit to its reactor. The ship had been vaporized instantly. 400 people gone in a flash. No time to evacuate, no time to say goodbye. Just gone. He made sure their names would be included in the memorial. Made sure they would be remembered. The fleet prepared to leave Xerxes Prime on the 4th day. Ships formed up in departure order, the damaged vessels in the center of the formation. The combat-capable ones on the outside providing protection. They would jump together back to Earth. Lieutenant Peters sat in his fighter one last time before they departed. He touched the picture of his daughter on his console. She was smiling in the photo, happy and innocent. He had avenged her, made the Kraith pay, but it felt hollow, empty. Revenge did not bring her back, did not fill the hole in his heart. He understood that now. The fighting was over, but the grief remained. Maybe that was okay. Maybe grief was how you honored the dead, by carrying their memory, by making sure they were never forgotten. The fleet jumped back to Earth in stages. The journey took 2 days subjective time. When they finally emerged in Earth orbit, the planet was waiting. Billions of people watching. News cameras capturing every angle. The fleet came home battered and bloodied but victorious. They had done what they set out to do. Made the Kraith pay. Shown the galaxy that humanity would not be victims. Admiral Bennett stood on the bridge and looked at Earth through the viewports. Home. It looked beautiful after weeks in the dark. Blue and green and alive. All ships, this is Admiral Bennett, we did it. We brought justice for New Haven. We made sure the galaxy knows what happens when you murder human beings. Be proud of what we accomplished here. Honor those we lost. Remember why we fought? The message was sent to every ship. Then she added one more thing. Welcome home. Earth threw parades for the returning fleet. The streets were packed with people. Veterans from previous wars came out to salute the ships. Children waved flags. The celebrations lasted for days, but there were also memorials. Services for the dead, long lists of names carved into stone. The 7 million from New Haven, the 38,000 from the fleet. Each name was a person. Each person was remembered. Hayes stood before the memorial and found Chief Martinez's name. He touched it gently. The engineer had saved 30 people by sacrificing himself. His family stood nearby. His wife and 2 kids. Hayes went over and spoke with them. Told them how brave their father had been. How he had died a hero. It did not make the loss easier. Nothing could do that. But maybe it helped them understand that his death had meaning. That it had mattered. Grant attended the memorial service at Earth Defense Command. She wore her dress uniform. Stood at attention as the names were read. So many names. Some she had known personally. Others were just faces in crowds. But they had all been human. They had all been family in a way. Brooks gave a speech at the pilot's memorial. She talked about courage and sacrifice, about duty and honor, about the 41 pilots who had given everything for humanity's future. Their names would be inscribed on a monument at the military academy. Future pilots would see them and understand the cost of service. Peters attended with the other survivors. He did not speak, just stood in the back and lay